Good afternoon and welcome to Techopia Live. Thank you very much for joining us here today on our Facebook page as yet again we share some insight with you surrounding the tech community in our city and also on a national basis. For those of you that haven't done so already, make sure that you like our page, and of course you are welcome to comment on this video. That's exactly why we do this. Make sure that you also stay tuned to techopia.ca, which will give you more information about the tech community, as I said, both locally and also nationally. Today with me we have the CEO of the Branham Group, Wayne Gudbranson. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking.
Well, you know what, we're always talking so much about Ottawa and the tech community and the business community right here on Techopia, which is exactly what we love to do. But the reason why we wanted to have you join us today is because I know there is the well-known and very much respected Branham 300 list that is put together by the Branham Group, which you just recently released as well, which we wanted to give a little bit more insight on in the first place to our viewers, but also have you explain a little bit how that pertains to Ottawa, the tech community, the business community in general. So let's start with the first things first. Maybe you can share with us firstly, what is the Branham Group? What do you guys focus on? And then let's jump in a little bit and talk about what is the Branham 300? What is that list and what is it compiled of?
Sure, thanks. Again, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's delightful. It's actually delightful coming here because you see so much development and so much emotion and drive in around technology development. It's nice to be here. Branham Group, by the way, is a information technology analyst and strategic advisory focusing on the global technology industry. 80% of our customers are vendors of products and services around the world, and 20% are economic development agencies, venture capitalists, and so on. Our organization fundamentally drives revenue from our advisory services, which includes planning, marketing, and partnering. And we do that right around the world. 60%, close to 60% of our work is U.S., 30% Canada, 10% of the rest of the world, largely Europe, and a little bit of Pacific Rim and Japan. We compete with some very large UK and US firms, and we do quite well up against them going forward. In terms of the Branham 300, we've been doing this for 24 years. In fact, this is the 24th edition of the Branham 300. It morphed from the Branham 100 software companies into the top 250 ICT, Canadian domestic, the 25 foreign multinationals, and the 25 up-and-comers that we see across Canada. It's a list that's quite unique. It covers both, it lists both publicly traded and privately held firms. You won't see too many lists that have privately held, because typically privately held companies are hold their financial dear and close to their heart. They don't want to divulge that. We've been able to convince some of them that it's a good thing in the interest of the industry going forward, because so many privately held companies are a key component of our industrial sector. So it's a listing of the top 250 Canadian technology companies ranked on the lowest common denominator, that is gross revenues. So we cannot change the data when it comes in. Number one is number one, and number 250th is number 250th. We can't push companies around in any other direction. It's probably the most objective list of technology companies anywhere apart from NASDAQ, right? So it's a very impressive list. And over the years, we've seen a lot of changes in the Canadian environment for sure. But we have also seen a number of key success stories as well. So I'll give you an indication. Our 25 up-and-comers is a list where we qualitatively and quantitatively suggest that these 25 companies could have great potential going forward. And we were the first ones to identify Radian 6, which was acquired by Salesforce.com for a nice chunk of change of $360 million, right? So we're in the business of identifying those types of companies going forward. Yeah.
So it's exciting to see, because it is wonderful to see firstly that us as a country, Canada is, it's just, there's so much growth, and I'm sure you've seen so much growth happening over the last, let's say 3 to 5 years, probably just ramping up over the last few years. But maybe you can give us a little bit of insight, and I'll actually click here on the Branham 300 so we can kind of start getting an idea of who is the participants or who is the companies on those lists. But maybe you can share with me, as we go through the list here as well, what is the idea? As you just mentioned, yes, it's also to identify some companies that's really standing out, really moving forward, really to keep your eye on moving forward. But what do you think the average business or the tech company or the tech community can do with this information? What would you ideally see companies do with this data and, you know, take it to the next step?
Okay, so maybe I'll put this in further historical context. I've been around this industry close to 30 years, and I remember before starting Branham Group, I worked at a brilliant company called Cognos, which was ultimately acquired by IBM. And Cognos' product is, in my opinion, the DNA of Watson, what Watson is today. But back then, Canadian technology companies had an inferiority complex. They believed they needed to look American to be successful, right? What's changed over the years, by the way, is that there's a Canadian bravado now in around our own industry. But back then, the Cognizes, the Delrinas, the Fulcrums all wanted to look American. And I was a strong Canadian, held the flag over my shoulder, felt we should produce a list that tells the world that, oh, by the way, Cognos is a Canadian firm. We're based in Canada. So it very much started from the standpoint of raising our flag or pushing our flag, right? What's morphed in this is an industry collection tool or monitoring tool. So today, by the way, the top 250 Canadian companies represent 54% of the cumulative revenue generated by the ICT sector in Canada. So with good reason, there's a lot of focus on disruptors and startups, which is evidence here. We also have to have a focus on the top 250 companies that have been generating revenue for several years and come out with policies that are indicative or conducive towards building that particular component of our industry going forward, right? The 250 listing includes integrated ICT companies such as BCE and TELUS, and those traditional telecom companies. We don't call them telecom anymore because so many of those companies have broadened out into so many other spheres of activity. And I quite often look at TELUS because they have $1 billion plus business in healthcare going forward. They're arguably the largest healthcare solutions player in Canada, right? So even today, people still think of them as traditional telecoms. We don't whatsoever. They have so many things going on in those firms. Also in there are computer software companies, which when you look at the classification of companies, it really hasn't changed. In the early days, we split them out in terms of software, hardware, and services. Well, the listing today is not really much different. You might use SaaS or IIS or PaaS to describe them, but fundamentally at the core of it is software, hardware, and services players going forward, right? It includes small, medium, and large organizations. It includes organizations that provide vertical industry apps, financial, healthcare, discrete manufacturing, pharmaceutical, right down to horizontal capabilities, not unlike Shopify, which has a brilliant e-commerce capability, as we all know, here in Ottawa, focusing on opportunities there in that marketplace going forward, right? So it includes quite a wide range of firms. What people can learn from this data set is several. One is our Canadian industry is strong and very vibrant. In fact, we're tracking firms that, interesting for a Canadian audience, are from Silicon Valley down the States that are moving to Toronto to access talent, to access venture capital, to access good corporate tax rates, to access R&D tax credits. So we know of one major cybersecurity firm has moved a significant portion of their R&D to Toronto. So we have, in this country, have to start feeling very proud about Canada's role in the technology industry. It's much more significant than it ever was. And even if you look at cities like Ottawa, that has built an enormous number of companies in the 2,200 range, is a very pivotal player, not only in Canada, but out throughout the world. Toronto, on a national scale, arguably could be the capital city of our technology community, much to the chagrin of people in Ottawa, Vancouver, Halifax, and Saskatoon, I presume, but nonetheless, you can't argue with the density of capability that's happening out in Southern Ontario. So it's quite an impressive list from that point of view.
Now, that's some amazing insight, and I'm glad you kind of clarified a little bit who is on the list and why they're on the list as well. And it's fascinating because, as you say, not just identifying potential, but also showcasing that a company is there for multiple reasons. There's more layers to those companies than just what you would usually think. As you just mentioned, TELUS as well. You wouldn't think of TELUS any other way, but I love the way that you've actually articulated that. So thank you for sharing that. And I know you just said Toronto might as well be the capital of the tech community, which as you just said, might be, some of the other cities might frown upon. But what I love about this as well, once again, it shows what's happening in each city. But then maybe I should ask you, you're sitting here today at the Innovation Center at Bayview Yachts, and you're surrounded with all the hustling and bustling that's happening here, and we have a blockchain event happening here as we speak. But maybe you can give me an idea, have you noticed just the influx of how Ottawa is comparing with other cities? I mean, once again, I know we've been recently dubbed, also like the key tech hub as well. And I know from a density perspective, we can't necessarily compete against Toronto, but just the amount of evolution that's taking place and the companies that are now suddenly have their eye on Ottawa. Do you find even in your travels and your conversation you have that Ottawa's coming up in the conversation more frequently?
Yes, it is. In fact, many years ago, without question, Ottawa was considered to be Silicon Valley North, and every cluster, every region goes through changes, and when they're going through a rebuild. I would say that Ottawa right now is going through a very successful rebuild, but it's a very interesting question that you bring up. So let me answer that question with the following answer. Following question. When I go abroad, meaning outside of Canada, and in fact outside of North America, I will ask a European that's in the technology community, when I say Canada, which center do you say? And most of them will say Waterloo, because Waterloo has built an enormous brand for their area, the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and good for them. But in actuality, when you look at the total number of firms in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, it's about 1,200. Now, when you carry that across Canada and you look at Ottawa, it's 2,200, yet we don't have the same brand recognition on an international scale. Again, that's rebuilding. Many, many years ago, we had a good brand in that regard, but Waterloo has taken over in terms of the rest of the world's image of Canada as a tech nation. Now, take that to Toronto. York Region, everything above north of the 401 is York Region. They have 2,700 firms. And most people in Canada won't know that. We do, because we track all these clusters. And so in reality, there's a number of activities happening across the country, right? Now, in terms of overall density, without question, Greater Toronto Area, excluding Kitchener-Waterloo, is of course number one. Interesting enough, Ottawa is second, right, in that area, and then you have Montreal, and then you have Vancouver and so on, right? But Ottawa is doing extremely well, but way behind the pack. And again, when I mentioned, Toronto or the GTA is the capital city, it really is. And the reason why it is that they have well over 6,000 firms in the Greater Toronto Area. There's the integration with the venture capital industry much tighter, the integration with the financial services sector. So all the components of a industrial ecosystem are there in Toronto. Where in Ottawa, we don't have all those components. I mean, Ottawa has a very strong public sector marketplace, a very strong technology marketplace, and then there's a reduction in overall industrial components here, right? But nonetheless, we produce great technology companies.
Love that insight, and maybe you can give me a little bit of insight from that perspective. What do you think, I mean, when you look through that list and all the companies that you have discussions with as well, what do you think is some of the key characteristics of the top companies that has made them successful, has made them kind of stand out from the rest and has made it to the top of the list? Because you see a lot of them kind of stay there. They continue to evolve, they continue to grow, they continue to change with the markets and evolve. And I guess in this day and age, it's either you adapt or die, so to speak. But what would you say is the key characteristics that you feel really differentiates these top companies?
Well, first of all, they have depth and breadth, and they have scale. That's a big one. But when you look beyond the top tier of 5 companies that traditionally haven't changed much in the last couple of years, and that means the integrated ICT companies and the likes of Celestica and so on, then you get into the realm of the Shopifys, and they've been innovating so well. In fact, they're growing at almost a compound annual growth rate of 100% going forward, right? I would say, of all the companies we see out there in terms of the net new players and new leadership, Shopify is number one. So I will give credit to Tobias. I think he is the one leader in our technology industry right across Canada everybody looks to for advice and leadership going forward because they've done so well. Remember, Shopify was the first investment that had $1 billion market cap, and that was based in Ottawa, and that was Shopify, right? Now they're diversifying and locating a lot of people around the country as well, including centers like Waterloo, right? Because they have to be not only a national but an international firm, right? But I think the key success criteria, the key success factors in many of these firms is that they know the ability to innovate. They have the ability to apply sales and marketing. And this is a very fundamental thing. The real risk in any enterprise, including tech, is not actually in technology development. That problem has been solved, right? There's so many very, very good technologists out there that's not the biggest challenge. Although we do have a shortage of talented people in that area, that's not the bigger challenge. Those companies that are successful are the ones that understand that the real risk in an enterprise is sales and marketing. Let me be succinct on this. If you don't have a customer, you don't have a business, right? You can build something, and it's actually food for thought for many of these companies in here. You can go ahead and build something on the notion that you're going to build the greatest app since sliced bread, but do you have a customer for what you're delivering? And I think that's the gap between success and potential failure, is that do you have a customer? Do you have somebody that's willing to buy this tomorrow if you build it, right? And that's where traditional non-technology consumer industries have a better knowledge of what to do rather than traditional technology, industrial, marketing-oriented organizations, right? So true success, innovation, and understanding the real risk in an enterprise is sales and marketing.
It's so true, and it consistently keeping that evolution in mind of how you can engage with your customer and take care of them and maintain your customer base. And these top companies, that's a clear example of that. Now, once again, I love to get your insight as well, because although you're based here in Ottawa, you are so across the country and you have so many international discussions, and that's why I love it when you call it like it is. So maybe you can give me some insight of how you think, if Ottawa wants to be that first name that comes up, first city that comes up in someone's head when they go, oh, yes, Ottawa, you mean, correct? Oh, you're in the capital. Yes, I get it. That's the place. What do you think this city needs to do? What do you think maybe companies need to do to expand that brand, to build on that, to make sure that we are the first name that comes up?
This is a great question. It's almost as if I think it was almost prepared or something. I'll tell you what. Let's look at Toronto why is Toronto and companies in Toronto so successful? Because you have absolutely every industry code and sub-industry represented in that city. So if you're into fintech, you can walk down the street and go see CIBC, right? So in that regard, and you're following that logic, what is Ottawa about? Well, Ottawa has a huge presence in the government sector, right? The federal government, a good representative component of the Ontario government, also the fourth largest city regional municipal government, right? So just think about that for a second, because we have a built-in lab here to build applications that will improve the efficiency of government. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably a little bit controversial, but the totality of employment in this country covered or funded through public sector institutions represents as high as 30%. Now that 30% is 30% of what you're paying of 100% of your taxes, right? Now remember, people in the public sector do not make a net contribution to tax because it's money that's churned through the system all the time. So I'm not a rabid Republican. Good God, I would never say that in these days and times. But we have a mission and should have the ability to make government more efficient, right? To be pro-right-size government. And so that is somewhat political in nature that I'm saying, but not really, because government is a real cost center, right? And so what we could do in this town is actually focus on technology that is designed to make government, the public sector, far more efficient. So let me give you an example. We have a fairly standard legislative system. We are a bicameral system where we have two legislative houses and we pass legislation. And when there's a vote, the member of parliament has to be in the house to vote. Why haven't we built electronic technology such that if there's a member of parliament traveling on business in Germany, he or she can go to their laptop can't we do that? And so I know that's a very simple kind of an example, but getting back to Ottawa, we're here in the seat of government power, right? That's a huge industry vertical, and we could be building technologies that simply makes it far more efficient.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that up, because I do think that is food for thought, and definitely what's wonderful about the tech community as well, and I think we've mentioned it before. And for those of you that's joining us here on Techopia Live, I'm here with the CEO of the Branham Group, Wayne Gudbranson. You've been an amazing guest today, Wayne. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. But we're talking a little bit about the Branham 300, and we're also talking about just how we as a community within the Ottawa region can expand that brand and just once again build on what we are. I think the platform is there, no doubt, and I think we can use tech once again, not saying tech is a specific industry, but tech is more a platform or a tool to enhance other industries, whether it be government or health or whether it be so on and so forth. So thank you so much for your insight, Wayne. I really, really appreciate it. And it's always nice to have someone like you with a real national look and feel to come and step in here a little bit. For those of you that joined us today on Facebook, make sure that you go and check this out also on techopia.ca. You'll also see our newsletters there. Go and check out the Branham 300 and go and take some of this insight that's been shared today by Wayne, and hopefully you can use this data to really once again grow your company, advance your company, and see what's happening out there, because that's really what we're trying to do with this, is talk about what's happening out there so that we can work together collaboratively and just do more. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.